Hello guys and gals, and welcome to, well, what is this video? Today we're going to be going over the Paragon board. So, the skill tree is something that I think is familiar to a lot of people. It's not something that you really need a lot of training or understanding to figure out how it works. You pretty much just put the points in the skills that you want, you beef up the skills that you need, get the passives that you need for your particular build, and before you know, you've slapped together something that works. However, the Paragon board, which is something very different, is a board that specifically involves going through and clicking on a lot of things, and it seems very complicated. But to be honest with you, it's kind of not. If you've ever played a board game back in the day, like Monopoly or maybe even Chutes and Ladders or something like that, what it really involves is getting to your goal with the least number of points spent. And let's talk about the nodes. So first off, when you start, you get your little starting node here. It does absolutely nothing. And from here, you can progress through your game board. You only have a very specific number of piece moves. So, if you're playing Monopoly or whatever, everybody gets to go around the board of, a certain number of rolls. Or if you're playing, Chutes and Ladders or whatever it is, you can move your character a certain number of places. Well, everybody gets a turn and everybody moves a certain number of places. And depending on luck, you might be able to move more or less. But in this particular game, you're given an exact number of moves. The maximum number of moves that you have is 225. And how did I arrive at that number? Well, it's pretty easy. So you have 50 levels of Paragon, and you get 4 points per level. So times 4, which gives you 200 points. You also get 4 points per region, and there are 5 regions. So that's plus 4, plus 4, plus 4, plus 4, and plus 4, which gets us to 220. There are also 5 Lilith statues within the world that have Paragon points on them. So if you collect your Paragon, your Lilith statues, you will get an additional 5 Paragon points from the Lilith statues, which is definitely very nice, which leads us to 225 Paragon points. Now, each time you progress through the board, you will use up one of those Paragon points. There are many different nodes throughout the Paragon board. These nodes specifically, like the intelligence nodes, the willpower nodes, the dexterity nodes, and also the strength nodes, which I'm not even sure if I have any strength nodes on my board. There we go, strength nodes, are essentially your travel nodes. It's how you get from your, point A to your point B. The magical nodes tend to surround rare nodes, and the magical nodes are actually pretty powerful too, offering things like resistance to elements, maximum life, even plus 5% damage. We've got armor, we've got dexterity. We have lucky hit chance to execute enemies, attack speed, potion healing, life regeneration. I mean, there are tons and tons of various effects that come from the blue magic nodes, but they always tend to be more powerful than the regular nodes. For instance, if we take a look at a dexterity node, it only gives 5 on a normal node. However, the magical nodes that give dexterity give us 7 on those same exact stats. So as you can see here, I've got 7 willpower, but only 5 on the normal node. So you get more for going with the magic nodes. Then finally, we have the rare nodes. Now, the rare nodes are usually pretty sought after, and they have effects that are either really, really good, or in my opinion, really, really bad. This one in particular is 20% additional damage with 4% maximum life. Now you notice at the bottom it says bonus, another 10% damage if the requirements are met. Now what are the requirements? Well, I have to have at least 160 willpower. So willpower it's referring to is actually my current willpower. So I currently have 305 willpower on my character, and as you can see it mimics that with 305. So if I don't have enough willpower on my actual character, this node bonus effect will not activate. This one over here is 8% resistance to all elements, and another 4% if I have at least 170 dexterity, which is very, very good. And then on top of that, we also have armor intelligence, we've got damage intelligence, and all of these have their own specific requirements. We also have in this legendary nodes. So legendary nodes are generally the focus for which you will actually choose a board or why you will choose a board, because the legendary effect on those nodes is going to be more important to you than just about anything. This particular one is consuming 5 corpses, grants 40% increased damage for 6 seconds. I also have another one over here, which is with at least 2 corpses nearby, you gain a 15% damage reduction. With no corpses, you deal 15% increased damage. And then this one right here is hitting enemies with bone skills, increases your maximum damage by 1% and your maximum essence by 3 for 8 seconds. Stacks up to 8%, increased damage and 24 maximum essence. So as you can see, we have some pretty interesting legendary nodes as well. Now, the some of these are actually amazing. Like this one is +1 essence on kill, which I absolutely enjoy. However, some of these are pretty terrible. Like I've got a couple here that I would probably never go to. Like, for instance, damage to injured enemies. I think damage to injured enemies is one of the worst modifiers in the game, pretty much. So I probably would never go over to this. And that's really what it comes down to, is traveling to your destination, getting the effects that you would like, and getting, you know, things like legendary nodes and whatnot. Now, there is one more gate tile besides those, and that is the board attachment nodes. Now, the board attachment nodes actually give you +5 to all stats, which is actually pretty nice, because you get, obviously, your main stats plus other things. And it's really important for you to know what your stats do. So let's hop out of the board here for a second, and let's take a look at our stats. So I'm on a Necromancer right now, and this is different for every class. So you're going to want to take a look at yours and see what your stats do. So my strength only gives me armor, which is something that I don't necessarily need. So plus strength for me is kind of like a very meh thing. Intelligence, which is the kind of main stat for this character, but also kind of not. It really depends on how you want to build your character. Is the one that increases my skill damage. So I have a 73% skill damage here, and if I pump that intelligence up even higher, I might be able to get my skill damage even better. It also gives me resistance to elements, which is actually really nice as well, which is going to help, you know, make me a little bit tankier versus those fire attacks or lightning attacks or poison attacks and so forth and so on. Willpower gives me resource regeneration, improved healing, and overpower damage, which is very nice. And then finally, dexterity gives me critical strike chance, which is actually really good for certain builds, like the Bone Spear build. And also increased dodge chance, which is, again, some survivability. Now, if we go back to the tree, we also have another effect here. So this is the last one to go over, and this is the glyph sockets. So as you level up and you go through sigils and dungeons and things like this, you will find glyphs. I've got a whole bunch of glyphs down here, and they do various things, like increasing the vulnerability damage. Or, for instance, this one increases the rare nodes within range. So if I were to plink this down in the right spot, like, for instance, if I put it down right here, it could hit this rare node, and it could hit this rare node, increasing the effectiveness of those rare nodes, giving me pretty nice additional damage. Also, if I have at least 25 dexterity within range, I'm also going to get a very nice 2% damage increase, up to 12% for every close corpse, which is also a nice effect. This one here is for every 5 dexterity purchased within range, core skills deal 5.1% increased critical strike damage bonus. Now, how does this actually work? Well, if you take a look at the ability, it tells you the total here at the top, which is 16.6. However, if you look at the dexterity nodes, when you actually purchase them, you'll see that the dexterity nodes tell you they're adding 4.3% vulnerable damage. So because I put this glyph socket here, every dexterity node within range is going to increase the vulnerable damage by a pretty large margin, which means that with this particular glyph, I want to have as many dexterity nodes within range as possible, and I want to buy all of them because it's going to give me a huge bump of damage to my vulnerable attacks. Now, you might not be able to do that, though, depending on how you have your board set up. And this is the interesting thing about the Paragon board, is that you can travel a very long distance, but traveling a long distance might not necessarily be the best choice. For instance, I had to travel for a very long distance to reach this rare node, as well as this legendary node, right? Well, I came from here, and even if we take the red part out, I still had to spend 5 in dexterity, 5 in dexterity. I got some pretty good intelligence here, which is nice for my class. But then I had to spend a point in willpower here, which I might not have necessarily spent. Another point in dex, another point in willpower, another point in dex to reach this rare node, and then I had to spend several points in willpower here, as you can see, and several points into dexterity here, which I might not have otherwise spent. So traveling to a destination can sometimes, unfortunately, lead you down a road where you might not necessarily want those specific effects. You could maybe consider that a waste. The general goal of this is to get as many bonuses as you can for basically the least amount of travel. There's also a lot to be said for leveling up. So as you level up, you're not going to have all of your points. So you may focus your points on, for instance, some rare nodes instead of traveling to the next board, or even just, leaving them there until you get to the next board. Like, for instance, right now, if I wanted to go to the next board, I could take this path right here, or I could take this path. I'm not really sure I want any of those nodes, but this one does have life regeneration and potion healing. This one is damage to injured enemies, which I don't really care about, but it does have a little bit of crit strike damage up here. So I could go for the crit strike damage. So let's go this way. So it would take me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'd probably want to grab that one, so 6. Then 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, just to reach the next board. And then 15 to reach the next board, right? So let's preview another board here. So I've got 5 boards, and this is the board selection window. And here it will tell you what the legendary node is for this particular board. It will tell you what the rare nodes are. It will tell you all of them so you can get an idea of what you're getting into. So for instance, I can go through these, find one that I might specifically want, and malediction, damage over time, maximum life, and going through these, you might choose them specifically for the legendary node effect, or you may just choose them for the rare node effects, which is also another way that you could go. Now, I'm looking at a couple of these and trying to figure out which one I specifically would like for my build. And let's do this one because I do like that damage while fortified. That sounds really interesting. And then damage while healthy is not terrible. And I'm not really sure exactly what I'm going to choose, but let's go ahead and preview it. So when you preview a board, which is what I'm doing right now, you get to see the board and what it looks like. So you get to go over it, look at all the modifiers, see what kind of damage output you could potentially get from it. You can rotate the board. And this is so that you can choose the most optimal path to what you would like to go to. Say, for instance, you wanted to go to the legendary node. Well, what's the shortest path to the legendary node? So, like, if I took this one, this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, right? Well, what if I did it from a different direction? What if I did it from this direction? So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So it's the same distance no matter what. But maybe I wanted to get closer to the glyph socket instead of the legendary node. So in this case, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. So it's further to get to the legendary node, but now it's closer to the glyph socket. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's only 10 spaces to the glyph socket. So in this particular case, I could potentially do it like this, so I'd have a much closer or cheaper access to the glyph socket. But maybe that's not the closest. So that was 10 to the glyph socket there. So let's rotate it again. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So again, 10 to the glyph socket. So as you can see, rotating the board can have various effects on, number one, which nodes that you have access to for the cheapest number of points, how close the glyph socket is to the gate, including how close the legendary node is to the gate. So choosing the correct rotation for your board can be very important because it can limit the number of choices that you number of points that you have to spend. Now, speaking of the number of points that I have to spend, let's say I was trying specifically to get this node right here. Well, it's going to take me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 Paragon points, right? Well, there's no reason to just spend your points traveling to a destination if you can't get there. So what you want to do is you want to save up your points for the time being and spend them somewhere else. And what do I mean by spend them somewhere else? Well, there's tons of other places that you could potentially spend them. You could spend them on rare nodes or magical nodes like this. In my particular case, I have some rare and magical nodes over here that I would much rather like for instance, this 7.5% crit with bone skills. I'd probably spend my Paragon points in these as opposed to wasting them on traveling to something that I can't reach. Now, once I have enough points to reach the destination that I'm looking for, I would probably pull those points out of these and then spend them over there. And this, in this way, you can definitely get some very interesting increases in damage, at least until you can reach the destination which you're trying to get to. From what I've noticed, this first board is actually pretty ridiculous for most players. So you might want to really examine this first board. It's a very small board. Everything is tightly packed together, and it's very easy to get access to everything. So every board, as you can clearly see, has 1, 2, 3, 4 rare nodes, right? Spread out all over the map. There's also 2 usually right near the center. Well, the first board has 4 rare nodes. It doesn't have the extra 2, but it does have them really close together, really tightly packed together. It also has the same number of magic nodes that 4 rare nodes come with. So, for instance, magic nodes are spread out in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 around the rare node. These magical nodes can sometimes be extremely powerful to your build. So early on in the game, when you're first starting and you don't really have a lot of Paragon points, this first board is actually the most powerful board in my opinion, because you can get access to things like 8% resistance at 4% resistance to all elements. You can get access to 20% damage and an extra 10% damage to your character, 4% to your maximum life. Here you can get 200 armor and 10 intelligence, 20% damage and 10 intelligence. And then the nodes themselves are very good too. 2% max life, 5% damage, 2% max life, 5% damage, 2% resist all elements, 2% max life. Things like 7 to dexterity, which give you the crit if you're utilizing that specific glyph. 50 to armor, which gives you a nice little bump in damage, 5% damage. And just in general, if you take advantage of these early nodes on the Paragon board, it definitely seems to help out a lot in your power levels early on. Now, eventually, you might take some of these points out of here so that you can travel to specific things. But from what I've noticed, there only usually tends to be about 2 to 3 legendary nodes that you're actually interested in. And at that point, it becomes a game of reaching the rare nodes that have the effects that you want, the glyph sockets, because you can put like a million things in the glyph sockets. As you can see here in my glyphs that I currently have obtained, I mean, I have a whole bunch of various effects. Like I've got rare nodes that give me increase to all the magical nodes within range. I've got rare nodes that give me an increase to all the rare nodes within range. Now, I was actually really considering this magical node one because I have such good magical nodes on the first tree. These 5% damages, the the dexterities and things like this. But unfortunately, these, which I think are the most powerful ones down here, are not reachable by this glyph socket. And this is kind of like the interesting thing that you have to take into account. So with the glyphs, they have a range. And the range of the glyphs, it levels up with them. Now, how do you level up glyphs? Well, it's really easy. You actually just do Nightmare Dungeons. Nightmare Dungeons are sigils that you obtain when you're doing various things like world bosses and whatnot. They can also be crafted. So if you go to your occultist once you get your first sigil, she'll talk to you about sigils, and you can actually craft them. So for instance, I might craft myself a 36 to 40 here. Sigils go into your consumable slot, and as you can see here, they have random effects which allow the monsters to get buffs, and you get some buffs too. It's all very interesting, but basically it just causes some havoc, which can definitely be interesting. Now, this particular sigil is going to give me a pretty decent amount of EXP, which I can then spend on the Paragon glyphs. These glyphs will level up, and as I level them up, the radius will increase. Most of them will tell you when the radius increases. So for instance, the magic nodes will tell you that they max out their radius at level 4, which is relatively low. The rare nodes max out their radius at level 15, which is the bigger radius. So this one right here, as you can see, I have already maxed out the radius on, so it is at its maximum radius. And comparatively to this one down here, you can see it's a much smaller radius. Now, what does this actually mean? Well, inside the radius, to get the additional bonuses, you generally need to spend a certain amount of Paragon points on the effects that the glyph is requiring. So in this particular case, we have 25 dexterity as our requirement, and honestly, with this particular type of glyph, you actually want to spend more than the amount. So I could actually pull some points out. For instance, I can pull some points out here, or I could pull some from over here with the critical strike to bone skills. Let's pull that one, and we could spend another point in dexterity. So if we find another dexterity node within here, like this one right here, we could spend a point on that, but we would need to travel to it. We'd have to travel to that one as well. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot that we can't just pick up. So let's pull another point out, so that we can travel to this one real quick. So if we put 1 point here, and then we put 1 point here, you'll notice that all of a sudden now we've got an extra 4.3% vulnerability damage, which is going to stack on top of the other vulnerability damage. So every point of dexterity that we spend here is going to give us a pretty massive bump in our damage output, because we're always making the monsters vulnerable with our abilities. That's how my character is set up. Vulnerable damage is one of the highest damage output increases that you can get, and it's definitely something that you should probably work in on every character. Now, these glyphs are things that you're going to be working on for a while. Your general goal with these glyphs is to get these things leveled up to level 15, the rares, so that they can actually do their job properly, and they have a larger effect. Now, the reason why you want the larger effect is because there's not always enough dexterity within range. If I actually swap these out, you'll see what I mean. So if I swap out glyphs to another one that does not have the radius of 15, like for instance this one, you'll notice that it says requirements not met, 22 out of 25. Then I try and look within this radius to see if there's any more dexterity that I can spend, and the answer is no. There's no more dexterity that I could purchase within the radius of this ability. So even if I spend every single point into every single radius that's within the red circle, or the red, I don't even know, diamond, I guess, or square. I guess it's just a diamond. Yeah. It's a square turned on its side, so it's a diamond. There's not enough dexterity within this to actually get the effect. So sometimes you need the increased range to actually be able to get the effect at all, because if you don't have enough radius, you're not going to get that additional effect. Now, the rare node bonus, which is I currently have one that's 90% to all rare nodes within range. I currently have 2 rare nodes within range of this one, so let's check and see how this does. So we have a 20% damage bonus with 10 intelligence, and then we have a 200 armor with 10 intelligence, right? So we take our rare node bonus and we throw this one down, and now we have 38% damage and 19 intelligence with 380 armor and 19 intelligence. So as you can see, a pretty strong bonus to the rare nodes within this range. You could potentially put it here and get the damage to elites and the resistance to all, or you could put it somewhere else. Now, increasing the range of these is not necessarily required unless you can't reach the rare nodes. For instance, if I'm over here and I take this same node and I put it on this spot, which is also has rare nodes nearby, notice that it cannot reach the rare nodes, so it is completely useless in this particular scenario, which makes it not really something that I'd want there. Now, rare nodes are not the only thing that can be increased. You can also increase magical nodes. So I have another one here which increases magic nodes by 30%, as you can see. So if I drop this one in instead of that one, now I'm getting an increase to this magical node, but I have to actually purchase them, you see. So I'm not getting an increase to the armor or the willpower here. Now, if this node is leveled up to a larger size as well, which would be the equivalent of this one, as you can see, no, not that one, my bad. This one right here, which has a much larger size, as you can see, it's going to hit more magical nodes, and it's going to be more useful. So we could potentially get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 magical nodes with this one bonus effect, which is pretty darn good. Now, where you place these glyphs is going to be important, as you can see, because obviously placing the rare node one here is actually a pretty good option, because I can hit these two very early on, beefing up my damage and my intelligence. However, if I placed it up here, that would be pretty stupid, because it's not actually hitting anything. And it seems like to me that the best way to do this is to get these leveled up to level 15 first, so that the radius increases, so that they can actually be useful. All in all, the Paragon board is something that we're all going to have to explore and play around with. If you're worried that there's a right answer and you're not doing it, honestly, my advice to you would be don't. Because I don't think there is a right answer right now. There are hundreds of different ways that you could do these Paragon boards, and hundreds of different ways that you can set up your character. And each individual character is going to have a different answer for the Paragon board on what kind of damage output that you can get. There are multiple legendary effects, obviously, so as you are going through the Paragon board and looking at the legendary nodes, some of these legendary nodes are going to be interesting to you, and some of them are not. I've also noticed that, to me, going down one particular path and keeping on that path can often be detrimental to your Paragon point spending. And what do I mean by that? Well, this glyph socket is so far away at this particular point that it might not be the right choice to go toward this glyph socket. It might cost me way too many Paragon points to actually reach this thing. On top of that, if I did go to this glyph socket and I did spend those points, it might then be beneficial to go down to the board gate and attach a new board. In other words, the more invested you are in a specific board, the more likely it's going to be that you're going to utilize that board to reach the next board. For instance, right now, this particular board I have very little investment in. So going toward the glyph socket and the gate, or any of the gates, is going to take a pretty heavy investment to reach there. However, this board, which I became heavily invested in due to the rare nodes, which have things like maximum essence on kill, the legendary nodes, which give me amazing effects, and also the freaking critical strike damage nodes with bone damage, I'm actually very heavily invested in this, and so I'm much closer to a gate here than I am to a gate here. So if I wanted to attach another board, I would take a look and see how close I am to a gate and how many points I would have to spend to get there. In this particular case, if we looked at this gate right here, which is the only gate left on my first additional board, which is my second board, it's going to cost me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 to reach the gate. However, over here, if I check this, because I came over here for this essence on kill, it's now only going to take me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to reach the next gate. So this gate is cheaper than going to this gate, and it's simply because I wanted these abilities. So I came over here, I traveled over here for these abilities, and I got what I wanted, and now it's cheaper for me to go this way than it is for me to go this way. And on top of that, the glyph socket is going to be very close to this gate as well, so coming over here specifically might be a very good option, especially considering there is bone skill damage and resistance to all elements over here as well. So what I probably will do is I will probably travel over here to the glyph socket, either from here or here, depending on which way is shorter. And we can, of course, check that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Or we probably want that one as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So it's the same distance no matter what. That's interesting. So from the glyph socket, is it closer to here or here, which is the two different gates that I have access to. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's the same distance to both gates from this glyph socket, so not a big deal. And then we're probably going to grab these as well because these rare nodes are actually pretty powerful. So at the end of the day, you're looking at some very interesting options on which way you can go. So taking this way to this gate is going to be more expensive than taking this road to either one of these gates, because it's going to be cheaper for me to reach these gates, and it's also going to be cheaper for me to reach this glyph socket than it probably would be for me to reach a glyph socket over here. So for instance, if I go ahead and attach a board here, you'll notice that I've still got to travel to the actual glyph socket as well, plus the distance here, whereas at least here I'm getting a glyph socket for cheaper. So in this case, you know, we've got our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, right? Or 12, I guess 12 to the glyph socket. Whereas here we've got to travel, you know, the full distance here, which was 13, and then 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 to get to that same glyph socket. So it's more expensive to go here for a new glyph socket than it is to just travel to this one. And that's really what it kind of looks like, is travel distance. Now, it's also about the sites. You know, if you're going to go to a town, like, for instance, if I'm driving through Tennessee, maybe I'm going to go to the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum, right? Well, it's the same thing here. So traveling is not the only thing. You don't want to just travel to a destination at the shortest route, because maybe there's something nearby that you would like to have access to. In my particular case, I traveled to this particular node here. Now, it might be cheaper to do this a different way. So let's actually count this out and let's see if it's cheaper to do this a different way. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to travel to this node, right? Well, I could also go from here instead. So what if I went from here and traveled down instead of going over? Can I save myself some points? Well, let's see. So we said that was 7, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if we travel down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's going to be about the same number of points to reach this rare node, is what it looks like to me. So no savings there, but could we potentially get more of the bonuses that we want? So for instance, in this case, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 intelligence nodes. We've got 2 dexterity nodes and 1 willpower. Can we make that even better by going over here? So we've got a dex, intelligence, willpower. So it looks like this travel is a little bit better. It's not terrible to make that travel across. And then from here, of course, we're traveling up to this node. Now this one we're going to get to no matter what. So even if we traveled from this direction or this direction, we're probably going to get both. Also, traveling across, we now are close to this node over here. So it might be a good idea to grab this one. And that's kind of how things go. So like as you're looking at the different various nodes, you're like, well, maybe I want, maybe I want to have access to this node down here. Now, this one does require 340 willpower, which I don't currently have. To meet the 4% maximum life requirement, I would need more willpower to get access to that. Now, this is one of the reasons why I recommend to look for all stats on items. So as you can see here, my helmet has 21 all stats, which gives me a pretty nice little bonus to all my statistics. Well, things like this can actually be very handy to allow you to reach the minimum requirement for nodes like this, so that you're not constantly underneath of the effects. And there's really no reason to go to these nodes if you're not going to meet the minimum requirements. I hate to say it, because like they give you such a huge bonus in addition. For instance, I mean, this one right here is giving me a bonus of 19% for meeting the minimum requirement, which is pretty massive, right? So I would be missing out on 19% damage increase if I don't have this node. trying to think if there's anything else I can go over, but if you guys have questions about this, I'm more than happy to go over anything you need to go over when it comes to this. Now, you can refund points. It's not that big of a deal. So if you make a mistake, you can refund points. Like, say I didn't want to go into this particular ability. The refund cost is only 7,000 per node. As you can see, I can just pull the node out, and I can put that point somewhere else. You do have to actually have a connection, though. So, for instance, I can't pull out this node because it will break the connection to another node. It even tells me you cannot refund a node that breaks the connection to another node. So if I wanted to refund all these nodes, I would have to refund all of them up to this point to be able to go from there. And it becomes an interesting game of, you know, trying to hit the nodes with the least amount spent and also in the right, you know, the right things. Like, for instance, over here I have a lot of dexterity, but it's so I could meet the dexterity requirement on the glyph socket. And that's really the only reason I have so much dexterity over here. But one thing I probably don't need is willpower. So as you can see, most of the time I tended to avoid the willpower nodes because that's not really something I was really super interested in. I also kind of avoided the strength nodes whenever I could because I don't really want the strength nodes either. But we did get things like the maximum damage, the armor, and of course the dexterity nodes. Now, in this particular case, I don't really need that specific dexterity node right there. So I could pull a node from anywhere, doesn't matter where, just right there for the time being, so that I could change the direction of this. So instead of going with 7 dexterity, I could remove that, which unfortunately breaks the node, so that doesn't help me out at all, does it? No, it does not. And so now you see why specifically I use that node to connect. But what I could do is pull that one out, get the 50 armor. I don't need that one because that one's not within the circle. And then I could min-max that way to get a little bit more armor instead of dexterity. Then I take that node that I pulled out and I put that back where I found it. So back over here in the 4 maximum essence. I'm still experimenting myself with the boards, and I don't have my maximum points yet, of course, because I'm not level 100. But I am currently level 77, which means I have a pretty good amount of Paragon points. You also get 4 Paragon points per level, so it's actually, like, even as you're leveling, you're going to see each one of these Paragon points is going to pop up. You get 1 at your 25% mark, 1 at your 50% mark, 1 at your 75% mark, and a last one when you level up to the next level, which is pretty cool. So you end up getting Paragon points like pretty much all the time while you're leveling your character, which has a pretty profound impact on your damage output. And I will say from my own personal experience that the Paragon points can make a huge difference in your attack power. Now, attack power is not the end-all be-all of stats, and it doesn't necessarily represent your full power as a character. But to give you an example, let me go ahead and pull out this rare node that I just put in here that enhances the two rare nodes that are nearby, right? So I'm going to remove this. Notice that my attack power just went down to 7,288. That's a pretty huge drop in attack power just for adding 1 node in the correct place with the correct effects. So taking this glyph socket and putting it back in with the 90% rare brings me up to a total of 8,168 attack power. And these nodes, like if I were to just go ahead and pull all of them out, like this one and this one, you're going to see a pretty stark drop in the amount of attack power that I have. These nodes, when used properly, really do have a drastic effect on like the output of damage for your character. And you're going to notice it. Like when you get these things set up properly, when you have the correct rare nodes, the correct glyph sockets, when you're utilizing the correct legendary aspects, these things are going to show in how powerful your character becomes. And don't be afraid to play around with it. You don't have to refund the entire board. And it's not that expensive really to refund individual nodes or even just 10 or 20 nodes and put them back in. You don't need to save your Paragon points. Spend them on things that are useful and then pull them out as necessary and put them back into places that you need them. Don't be afraid to count out how many points you need to reach that special node. And then save up those points, in other spots. And what I mean by save up points is spend them somewhere where they can be useful. And then once you actually have the ability to travel, you know, enough points to travel to your destination, take them out and then put them to your destination. I think that this is actually going to be a pretty intuitive system for most people. A lot of people are going to have fun playing this board game of how do I get the best benefit for my character, for my build. Not your build, not your build, not your build, but my build. How do I get the best benefit for my build traveling through this board? And what it really comes down to is looking at the various effects and figuring out exactly how that could help your character. You know, for instance, a lot of these effects are very specific. This one is bone skill damage. So if I'm not a bone skill necromancer, well then who cares? You're going to ignore this node. Some of them are actually pretty stupid, like the injured damage, which I don't think is very valuable at all. Or simple things like potion healing, which I don't really feel like is going to be a huge benefit for most people. Maybe if you're using temerity or something and you just have like a barrier coming from the amount of healing, then 2% potion healing could potentially mean more barrier in some interesting situations. But for the most part, I don't think most people are going to be caring too much about how much their potion heals. They're going to be caring more about things like all resistances, which is going to prevent them from taking the damage in the first place, or attack damage, which is going to help them dish out more damage to monsters, and things like that. I think I've gone over just about everything that I can, and it really comes down to questions. So if you have any questions specifically about the Paragon board, if if you're curious about something or you need some help figuring out your build, feel free to put comments down below and I'll do my best to answer them. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we just spend 41 minutes talking about Paragon boards. And as always, keep watching.